Welcome. We're doing a deep dive today into a case many of you know well, JonBenét Ramsey. We've really gone through the reports, the investigation.
Decades of material, really.
Exactly. And our mission, well, it's to unpack the critical missteps, look at the evidence, which is often contradictory, and, explore why this mystery still endures.
And what's so striking, I think, is how those very first hours really dictated how everything else unfolded. It almost immediately became this kind of Rorschach test, didn't it?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Let's start right there. December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey calls 911. JonBenét's missing. But even that call raised questions.
Right. The operator noted things.
Yeah, felt her panic, maybe seemed rehearsed, and thought she heard voices after Patsy supposedly hung up. Something like Burke asking, "What did you find?" Did that call and what happened right after sort of set the stage for problems?
Oh, absolutely. You have that initial ambiguity, but then crucially, the crime scene itself, it wasn't properly secured. Friends, family, they were allowed to move around freely.
Someone even cleaned surfaces.
That's right. Wiping down counters. And that became, well, what some call the investigation's original sin. It just compromised everything that came after. Any evidence found later is viewed through that lens of potential contamination. It makes definitive conclusions incredibly difficult.
Okay, so building on that chaos, the evidence itself, it's almost like it's designed to confuse, isn't it? You have JonBenét. She suffered this massive skull fracture, a really violent blow.
An 8.5-inch fracture, yeah.
He also strangled with a garrote made from Patsy's paintbrush handle and some cord. The pathologist couldn't even say for sure which injury happened first.
And right in the middle of all this physical evidence, you have the ransom note, which is just bizarre.
So tell us about that. 2.5 pages.
2.5 pages long, yes. Written inside the Ramsey house on their notepad with their pen, and the amount demanded, $118,000.
Almost exactly John Ramsey's recent bonus.
Precisely. So that screams inside knowledge, right? But then the note itself, it's so long, so theatrical. It doesn't really fit the profile of a typical kidnapper or a panicked parent trying to stage something. It's just odd.
And the other physical stuff just adds layers. The pineapple found in JonBenét's stomach.
Which didn't fit with Patsy's timeline of when JonBenét last ate. And then there's a bowl of pineapple downstairs in the kitchen.
With Burke's and Patsy's fingerprints on it.
Exactly. And then you've got downstairs in the basement, near the body, this unidentified boot print. A high-tech brand print. Points to an intruder, maybe.
But the potential entry point, that broken basement window,
had an undisturbed spider web. Right on the outside grate, which really argues against someone coming in that way, doesn't it?
So these conflicting pieces, how did they split the investigation?
Well, they fractured it completely. The Boulder police, they largely focused on the family, the note of the lack of clear forced entry initially. But you had Detective Luzmet, a veteran homicide investigator, brought in later.
He argued for an intruder, right?
Passionately. He pointed to that boot print, what he believed were stun gun marks on JonBenét's body. And crucially, this DNA profile found on her underwear and leggings, unknown male 1.
Okay, the DNA, that didn't match anyone in the family.
Correct. And that DNA eventually led the district attorney years later to publicly exonerate the Ramseys.
But critics jumped on that, didn't they? Pointing back to the contaminated scene, saying DNA transfer could explain it.
Exactly. They argue it's not conclusive because of that early chaos. And complicating things even more. Back in 1999, a grand jury actually voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey.
On what charges?
Child abuse, resulting in death, and accessory to a crime, which suggests the grand jury believed someone else might have been involved, but that the parents covered it up. Yet the DA at the time refused to prosecute, citing insufficient evidence to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
Wow, so you have an indictment but no prosecution, and later a public exoneration based on DNA that some say is questionable.
It leaves you in this perfect, deeply unsettling stalemate. The DNA points one way, maybe. The note and circumstances point another. Both theories have evidence supporting them, but also evidence contradicting them. Neither can fully cancel the other out.
So where does that leave things now? There's been talk of new efforts, forensic genealogy.
Right, police are still working on it, digitizing files, looking at modern DNA techniques, but those fundamental contradictions, the ones baked in from the start, they remain. The Ramseys, for their part, have always maintained their innocence.
It really does feel like a case trapped in ambiguity.
It is. And maybe, connecting it to the bigger picture, the JonBenét Ramsey case is this haunting reminder. A reminder that sometimes that initial fog, the confusion and missteps of the very first hours, well, maybe that fog never truly lifts. maybe it permanently obscures the truth, leaving us all wondering, what if the biggest clues were actually just the biggest red herrings?